Alright, today we're doing what I got. Ernst Jünger. It's a German officer in occupied Paris. The War Journals, 1941 to 1945. Okay, this is the Paris Diaries. Ernst Jünger. This is largely his time in World War II. This book, I think, fits nicely. My favorite book by Jünger is called On the Marble Cliffs, and that book is referenced in this book fairly heavily, and that book is reflected largely throughout this one, and he speaks of that, how that book it's coming to life, and it's being the real events are changing the book, are going back in time and changing it. And that's a fun book, On the Marble Cliffs, because you could come up with so many interpretations of what you think it means. It's somewhat clear, but it's an allegorical work, and it's very broad. It's not as, there are things where it seems to become very specific, and then you realize how broad it is, and it really gets deeper just if you study Jung at the time, and more. I mean, Jung himself has different kind of phases in the things he wrote and so forth. I'd say right before this was where he's more overtly fascist and like a national Bolshevik, as like the conservative revolutionaries. If you read what he wrote, he was calling for, in some ways, not that there's no gentleness about him or like, but he's calling for like a more totalitarian society than even the one he ended up with, even the one he got. But his attitude's very much different in this, and I think with On the Marble Cliffs, where his attitudes of the time were more fully expressed. I think these journals, this diary, is one meant to be read. Like, he advises people to keep diaries if they're going through some kind of interesting time that could be read later. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. First off, the scenery with World War II and with Ernst Jünger himself, and then in Paris, in occupied Paris, where there's a lot of other people hanging out, and like Jean Cocteau and Pablo Picasso and so on and so forth. Like, it always seems like I don't know, like it'd be a cool movie or something with all these people hanging out. But it goes into some of this, especially different people he hangs out with. He doesn't like the writer Louis Ferdinand Céline at all. But those are some of the more interesting moments of the book, I think, where he's very much angered. He goes and eats with him, and he hangs out with him, and he mentions that like Céline, he like goes to visit like the cat in the forest where the massacre of the Polish officers had taken place. The Germans are showing this off to Soviet war crimes and so forth, and he so Celine's going to see this, and then there's stuff with like he expected like a more violent German army in Paris, and which Jünger is disgusted by more, his the anti-Semitism of him and is the radicalism. Jünger himself comes off, I think. I mean, he's an interesting character, and I like his worldview, and I like all the stuff about his enchanted world, and this is enchanted, this is this is not, this is like his worldview seems to be of disenchantment and I don't know so much not so much re-enchantment, but just whether something is enchanted. I mean he's going over, he digs in deep into world history and different topics. Some of my favorite stuff in the book is when Jung he's studying shipwrecks and like Pitcairn Island, like Mutiny in the Bounty, and then all kinds of other shipwrecks, and it becomes a topic that he's interested in, and I like the way he writes on these things. He has kind of a curiosity to him, and like another good, he reads the Bible throughout the course of World War II, like a couple times, and he reads it and he reads it again, but it's not so much in the like someone who believes it. It is someone who maybe wants to believe it, but he's looking at it in like a skeptical way, or he considers it like a powerful allegory, a powerful like a repository of knowledge and wisdom, and so, but not necessarily as someone who just is going to believe in it or take something from it. And in certain things, like in certain ways like that, he comes across as like a kind of a hypocritical character, because it's like he would be a cold, like the image I think a lot of people have of Jünger, especially from Storms of Steel, or just the idea of like the cold, detached writer who's writing, and he presents that with all this stuff, but at times where it becomes like, well, who are you to speak on to make certain judgment calls, or just based on who you are and so forth. I mean, he's in the German army. He's in Paris. He's in the headquarters of General Sturmschnagel and Hans Spiedel and other people who later become implicated and later are involved with July 20 plot. Jünger himself seems to be maybe even more involved than he writes, but probably not. The way that the events play out is interesting in how who he interacts with, and what he's writing at the time. I mean, by the end of the war, he may start out kind of a detached figure in it, and he's just hanging out in Paris, and he could write coldly on this or that, and he is shocked by a lot of he can't stand Germany in in large part. He likes a lot of soldierly things. He likes a lot of the ideas of camaraderie and soldierliness, and in ways like that where it's important to be able to understand this guy, but he is trying to retreat into his own world, like his conservative, kind of revolutionary, kind of enchanted, philosophical, historical world. And in a way, it doesn't work out. I mean, his son dies in the war. His son is getting in trouble, more kind of repeating the things he's saying, and ends up in like a penal unit of so forth, or he goes back to duty in like an armored unit or something. But he ends up getting killed, actually killed in action in Italy, on these marble cliffs in Italy. Where it is interesting. I mean, the end of the book reminds you of like, it seems like on the marble cliffs, or but it's like this new. He's describing the U.S. coming in to his village, his enchanted German village, where the U.S. has all the firepower in the world. So he's watching. He's describing the armored vehicles and planes with, you know, all these explosives and all the power behind all the stuff. But by this time he's like a Volkssturm guy, and he's not so much into it. But I mean, the war is over, and he never got that involved in it. But like I say, by the end of it, he isn't so detached. I mean, his son is dead, and his village he's watching it taken over by this foreign superpower, as he describes it. But you know, I mean, he's got he has all these other problems to worry about, like how to keep his manuscripts from getting burned up or his place from being looted, and so it's a bit of a trip from his Paris journey. And he, in the book, he goes to Soviet territory as well. They go to he goes to the Caucasus. If they seem to want to take him there so he can take a look around, and he doesn't like what he see. He describes the Soviet Union, like this territory, as like he says it's like a completely a world with no enchantment at all. And so like what he describes there is largely, not necessarily, he's not going into heavy action, and there's none of that really in the book. Most of what he's describing is like the bombings and things like that, where he sees the U.S. airstrikes and he can describe them. He considers it the work of subtle brains, he says, and so he's writing on the Normandy campaign for a while. But this book, in general, most of it is just his diaries in Paris. He describes who he hangs out with, who he's reading, what he sees, and I think it works really well if you read. I really like On the Marble Cliffs, and a book he wrote called The Peace, and this kind of makes it like a trilogy of some kind, with I don't know if you'd put it in between or or at the end. By the way, this is a pretty new English translation that came out, so this is why we're doing this review. This came out a few years ago, but however many people have gotten around to this. So I think those books, On the Marble Cliffs, if you like that, or The Peace is a book I recommend, which is where Jünger goes into the post-World War II. He's writing that book like during this book in different kind of forms. However, I mean, you can speculate on what he's going for with it. but it comes out to, I mean, in that, after that, he's in the piece. He's describing a world where like theology rules, like a world of Europe after World War II, where people just debate theology. Like they get into Christianity and just that'll be the new thing that society's like based on is like what he's writing on. And so he's reading ahead of that. He reads the Bible and so forth. But however much he gets into it with all his religious ideas, they're very much his own particular ideas, and that's the way he seems to want things. He's retreated from the world and isn't much interested, but he is a product of his time. I mean, when you read this, he describes like their views towards. He describes like I mean he's into National Bolshevism, or for call it what you will. For it's a particular. I mean, however deep he's into this ideologically, but he's very much concerned about Ernst Jünger and his person in particular, and people like that, anarchists and so forth, are part of like the problem he has with the new regime, with the Nazi regime. That he has however many fans across the political spectrum, but he seems to identify heavily with this. But I mean, this is a tendency. To me, it doesn't seem any less violent or brutish or totalitarian or anything as what he got. I mean, he wanted something that was maybe a little more cerebral and intellectually underpinned, but it's whatever you know. It seems like this is what you want, this is what you get. But nevertheless, he is very much disenchanted with it. He's not taken with the regime. Whatever your feelings on this, it is worth kind of just going over like how like his opinions, and it's kind of it's interesting to read about World War II and from like in like a diary from someone who doesn't really know like he doesn't know that the next journal entry will be after Pearl Harbor, or so you don't know how these things are turning on, and he describes a lot of rumored things like that of like what he's hearing is going on in Russia. Like he's hearing about like mechanical killing methods and stuff like that, which seem to be rumor, that don't you've never heard about some of the stuff again, but then some of it is also the truth. Like some of it is a fact. Like where he describes someone he he knows, or this person met someone who and he said they were like an art teacher who led like a death squad in Lithuania, but he describes what you'd call the sardine method of killings, where like Einsatzgruppen units would like they dig a hole and they would have people lay down in the hole and they would machine gun this layer of people and they'd fill up another layer and they would you know go out that way till they filled his hole up. And he hears about this going on from someone in Lithuania. Is probably the killings in Riga, the Einsatzgruppen killings, but is what he's heard of some of this, but then you don't hear of everything. So you get, I mean, he's not he's not taken by the regime. Like he's very much writing his criticisms, and sometimes what he writes is maybe like the war atrocity. It's not really happening, but then some of the stuff he's hearing is happening. So just as a historical document, I I think this has a lot of value. Other stuff in here. If you're not into Ernst Jünger, I mean, you're not gonna care for this book at all. But if you are and you like his other writings, I mean, you'll probably think this is pretty dope. Like, because most of his books, even say his novels or his books that are just like whatever he's writing on, I mean, he'll digress for a long period of time, or even, I mean, even books like the Glass Bees isn't that much. It reminds me of like William Burroughs or something, where it just departs from the story for however long, and then comes back, and the actual story is there isn't much to it. So it's a lot of digression. But if you like his books and you like that sort of thing, then you'll probably like this book more than you'll probably find this more enjoyable than most of his books, because I think he did write this diary for people to read it. It seems artfully done, and a lot of what he describes dreams, he describes like visions, or so he describes his ideas, and some of it is kind of it's kind of trippy stuff, like the Ernst Jünger kind of method is to kind of trip you out, like the reader is supposed to have an inner experience, like triggered by what Jünger writes, and whether that happens for you or not, they that effect, I think you get it with the stuff, the way he writes some of the stuff. Some of the stuff obviously is going to be just kind of a boring diary entry, but most of it is more or less interesting from entry to entry. Jünger is somewhat hallucinatory and somewhat, he's trying to be kind of visionary and spiritual and with this stuff, and he has like a gentleness about him that is likable, whether anything else. I like a lot of people like find his character really appealing, like just as a character, as a person, like regardless of the strength of his writing, or so, and people may have different opinions on that, or on his ideas, which I think are largely horrible. Yeah, what he seems to what his people are aristocratic kind of German officers in the German army who, they seem to want some kind of, they want like a militaristic regime of sorts, but this isn't the one they got. They want like a totalitarian regime that's maybe more totalitarian, and they're just complaining about what they're dealing with and causing trouble. You see what's going on, where actually with these Germans, where it's presented like a very much like this monolithic dictatorship. In some ways, they had divisions amongst them where you wouldn't necessarily expect if you're not familiar with the actual facts, the actual histories of the stuff. And so this gets into some of the some of the people who he is fond of, and the German officers are, like did commit like massacres in World War II, and they weren't it's not like they were like peace movement or I mean, most of his readers seem to be in the German army and are performing their duty in Russia and so on, but they have their problems in the person of Hitler himself, who he feels if they could remove him, they could have maybe a better shot at the war. I mean, he has different ideas. He's allowed to. He's a private person, or no, he's not a private person, but he's like his own man in a way. He's in the German army, but he's a writer on the strength of his own um, writings, and he isn't. He can come up with new ideas. Like it is what he's writing about here is, I'd say, a departure from his earlier like the stuff. If you've read a lot of his articles, or you've read Storm of Steel, or his other kind of war stuff, or if you've read like On Pain or The Worker, I think that this is a departure from those ideas, and I mean, these are better ideas. But I mean, it's you're reading like something like Half Baked, obviously, but this is for someone if that you wants to read something like that. Like, it's not like a political treatise that it's you read this if you want to hear someone's musings on this or that. Like, he goes into all kinds of historical topics. He's really into like like Arabian Nights type stuff, and thousand Arabian Nights, and I especially like what he writes about shipwrecks, and it seems interesting in his own, like, why he's writing some of that stuff, like, because he's trying to retreat from the world. He wants to live on a desert island, and things like Pitcairn Island are interesting. He writes about how they have to start, like, they're on desert islands or something. You have to start a new micro civilization from scratch, and usually people just have the Bible on hand, so that's what they use, and so he's somewhat infatuated with these notions, or he's trying to study them, and so he makes a study. He doesn't reach any certain conclusions. But he's he looks into this, and he looks into that, and that's what makes if you're a similar kind of person and you do similar, you'll probably find a lot of this relatable or enjoyable. Anyhow, I for anyone who's into Jünger, I'd definitely recommend this book. I'd recommend, and that's my recommendation. I mean, I like the let's see, On the Marble Cliffs and The Peace. I'd say are probably my favorite books by Jung, and then this book, it really does, it makes it like a cool trilogy, or something or something like that. It's definitely that kind of era, and not to say that he's like the greatest guy ever. I mean, I've liked him for a while, up until I like him even when after he becomes more overrated. And I mean, there's however much interest in him now, but I'd say that's I mean, and then after this, the post-war stuff, because he lived a long life, and he continued. Some of that stuff, it's cool, but I don't think it's as good. I think that this is some of the best stuff. Definitely, if you've never read On the Marble Cliffs, read that. And if you're really into that, and you like to read that, and you like to kind of think of different ways in that it applies, or that if that book has meaning to you in certain ways, I I think this book will be kind of fun, because On the Marble Cliffs is a book that, I mean, I read it, and these are short books. I read that book actually online before I ever got a physical copy, and I read it in one sitting, and it's a book that, I mean, I had a lot of my own ideas that are personal to me about what it means, and I still do. And this, but it doesn't like change or subtract. You read this, you get kind of more backstory. You get more of the author's intent, which is kind of what I figured already. I've read a lot of the Jünger stuff at this point, but I found this book illuminating in reading that, and also the piece, but especially On the Marble Cliffs. Um, that this book is kind of fun and illuminating for that book, and what, like, you can come up with the different. Like I said, it is kind of interesting how this book, it does kind of, it seems to kind of play out in different ways, and he's writing that in his journals too, that it seems to be like coming to life. He's seeing that come to life, um and he's kind of questioning ideas he had about this era, and to him it's like an era of like brutality and like mass death and killing people, but then he is kind of revisiting notions and what it's about, and he's not sure. And he changes his mind, and I think he is disproven in certain ways. So he's like a man who doesn't get, he's not sure what he's describing and but that's why he puts in a journal, and he leaves it to you in a way. And so this is Ernst Jünger. The book is A German Officer in Occupied Paris. So these are the Paris Diaries. And there we go.